Hey there everybody, working on this 98 Honda Accord again. So this is going to be a two-part video, break it up into whatever you may need. We are replacing the wheel bearing and wheel hub on the front passenger side. And as well, at the same time, we are replacing the upper control arm ball joint. So they'll be broken out into those two things, whether you're just doing the wheel bearing, whether you're just doing the ball joint upper control arm. Even if this is you do an upper control arm for cambering reasons or aftermarket. So first we're going to go over bearing itself. So what you're going to need to do is take off your wheel. You grab this and make it easier to see. More or less, that's what you're going to see when you take off your wheel. I've got it jacked up under the front cross member, which is a good jacking point. And I've just got it on the bottle jack right now. I don't have any spare jack stands, which I would suggest doing as to support your car. You shouldn't leave them on jacks. Bottle jacks can do a pretty good job of not compressing over time. So, jumping right in, we've got the wheel off for lug nuts, and there's a 19mm. So we got that off, and you would see this guy on the shaft right there. And so first thing you're going to do is break away that axle nut. It's a 36mm. You can either bend the wedge of the nut out and then undo it, or you can use impact tools and you should just be able to bust it right off. So once you get that off, then you're going to do, I would suggest, the caliper. So the caliper itself is right there. The caliper mounts to the caliper bracket. That will be on the back of the knuckle assembly with these two bolts right here, 14mm. So you can just take those two out and the whole caliper will come with the mounting bracket, or you can take the caliper off first. What I did is I took the caliper off first so I can set the caliper aside more easily without having to hang it by its hose, and then I took the bracket off separately. It's also a good time to look at doing your brake rotor or your brake pads. So you've got your caliper. Those are 17mm glide bolts on the caliper itself. And those are situated on the back side of the caliper. If it was mounted in, it would sit like that. Bolt there on the back side. And I will show you what those look like. You've got your glide bolts. I cleaned mine off. I'm going to re-grease them when I put them in. So these are 17mm, one bottom, one top. I do believe the one with the little rubber gasket here on the end goes on the top. So we'll take those out. When they get them loose, they may feel like they don't want to come. Just pull them straight out. Not going to break anything. Set those aside. It's a good time to clean them so don't get stuck with any goo. Do remember to grease those before you put them back in, or you will have caliper slide problems. So we got the caliper disconnected from the bracket, and then you want to disconnect the caliper hose from the bolt here. That mounts on the bracket right up here. That's a 12mm. So I undid that and set it aside over there. It's a great place to set it. It's got a nice little support on the sway bar and the cross member linkage. So you don't want to be tugging on this hose. You can leave that one connected as is. So now we got the caliper out of the way. Let's move over to the tie rod. So this guy is going to be mounted in the upward position like this. It's going to have a lock pin, or what are those called? The little clips that go inside of here. You're going to have to bend it back out and either push it out or clip one side of it and then push it out. You don't reuse those. You're going to have to get some new ones. You can buy a kit of a bunch of different sizes at AutoZone for about 10 bucks. So once you get that out, there's going to be a nut on top of it. I believe it is a, I want to say 12mm. If not 12, it's 14. That mounts into the back of the knuckle here. Up like that. So once you get that free, you're going to need to disconnect this from the knuckle itself. The issue being this is slightly conical at the bottom, So when you tighten it down when it's installed, it actually seals up against the metal. So I would suggest try going at it with a small hammer. Just beat it down. Try not to mushroom the head. If it's not coming free, then you're probably going to want to get the nut back over here. Put the nut back on it on the very top. The nut will help prevent from mushrooming the head, and beat it with a small sledge or a beater until that guy falls free. You can get ball joint puller tools that'll come up behind this, and a little tool that you tighten and it'll pull these apart. It's always an option. So once that comes free, you just set that aside and make sure you don't rotate this around. Rotations is what sets the tie rod in and out. So just leave it as it is. Shouldn't need to mark anything. Should be fine to just sit like that. So now we are connected by the axle sitting in the hub still. So at this point, the axle will still be sitting in the hub. You'll have your upper ball joint mounted through there and your lower ball joint mounted through there. So what I'm going to suggest, from having done this and had so many problems with it, go for the lower ball joint first. I did not, and that was a bad move. You're going to undo the nut on the bottom, which should be a, let's say 17 millimeter. You undo the nut on the bottom, and then what you want to do is, the car is jacked up at this time. You're going to want to put the wheel back on, tighten down the lug nuts just tight enough to hold the wheel, and then take a piece of metal, either like a breaker bar or a really thick wrench or some spare steel, stick it in between the knuckle and this space right here. Because first you need to jack up the car. Sorry, I'm a little distracted right now. So as you see, I got this on a jack. You want to do something like that that will engage the suspension to make these separate apart. Slide something in there and then release that and let the car sit back down on the tire. The weight of the car should pop this free. Make sure you do this very slowly. Other option again is a ball joint puller tool. You can rent them at auto parts store. They don't charge you for the rental. Or you can come at the bottom and try and knock it out the same way you knock the tie rod out. So I ended up doing this a little differently, but I would suggest the wedging something in here and then setting the weight of the car down on the tire to get that free. That is by far the easiest method. Always keep a catch of some kind under the car to catch the car in case when it pops off the wheel slips out. Jack stand, another tire, something that if the car drops, it's not going to drop to the ground. So now you've got your lower ball joint free. This is a good time to inspect that guy and kind of fiddle around with it, see if there's any play. You know, it's supposed to have play like this, but it shouldn't have a bunch of clanking play. So you can see there's a little tear in this one. Probably should be replaced. So we've got the lower off. Now we're going for the upper. The upper control arm would be sitting up here, like that. So this is where your upper ball joint is. As you can see, this one is 100% shot. So there's another nut here. Should match the bottom one. I believe these are 14 millimeter. So you undo the nut on that, and then you can either knock it free the same way with a small sledge from the knuckle itself, or you can try and use a breaker bar, stick it through onto the spring, and then grab the weight of the control arm. But to do that, you would need to put the nut back on your lower ball joint so it has something to pull against, and then you can kind of just pry this free. So that'll get that apart. So now your knuckle is released from the car, but you should not have taken it out yet. You should, now that you're free from these, you should put the nuts on there to hold them. If you have the models with ABS, you have a wheel speed sensor in the side of your knuckle here. Just like that. It's on the back side. And mine is destroyed because it was so corroded in there. To get it out when it's not completely destroyed, there is a 10 mil bolt holding it on there. So it will come across, and there will be a 10 mil bolt right there. and a 10mm bolt right here. And then you undo all 3 of those, and you should be able to just pry the sensor out, hang it up around your spring, set it aside. If you don't have ABS, you can disregard all of that. That kind of gets your sensor just out of the way. If you want to just take the sensor with the knuckle and not have to pull it apart, come up into the engine bay, plugs in right here. There is a little compression clip there, a larger one there. For this one, you go back inside, squeeze the tabs, push it out, and this one, the tabs are on this side, just push one in, it should slide, push the other, and then you can just take the whole plug with it. But you are not going to want that in there when you move on to the next step, which is getting the bearing out. So at this point, this guy is going to look something like that. Still going to have your bearing and your hub in there. What I suggest, without, press, which would be optimal, is you can beat this guy out with either a 32 or a 33mm socket. You can set it right on the hub surface. If you are reusing this hub, you do not want to do this. This hub is completely shot that I'm taking out and is just ready to fail. The studs aren't staying in it anymore, and there's a lot of rust corrosion to it. So if you're not saving it, you can just beat it out. If you are saving it, it would be suggested that you don't beat it out with the metal contact. You can try and use a small piece of wood to set it on the back here and knock it out. You can try and get something that seats inside this lip, but again, you can't damage the splines, you can't damage this rounded part. This is what the axle sits inside of, but it may end up you need to take this in and have it pressed out by a mechanic or a body shop or something. But since I'm not saving it, I just beat it out with the hammer. That got my hub out. And then you would see the bearing in here. So the bearing, since you're obviously not saving it, what you need to do is remove, there's going to be, after you get the hub out, you'll see the C-clip. You'll need to get some clip pliers, squeeze that and pop it out, or you can just get like a pick and kind of pull one side and wedge it free and get that clip out. And then you go to the back side, and you can potentially use your 36mm socket you just used to beat this out. What ended up happening here is this bearing was so damaged that the bearing actually just fell apart. I hit it once with my 36mm socket and all the interior of the bearing fell out because excuse me, it's a little cold here. That is the outer ring of the bearing. It is seized inside of the knuckle. I'm actually going to have a mechanic press this out. It's going to be tomorrow. But if you don't have problems like salt roads where this is all corroded, a piece of worthless garbage now, you can knock that out. And then install is just going to be the reverse. Knock your bearing in. Be very gentle with the face of the bearing. Probably use a piece of wood to knock it in. And then you're going to press your hub in. You're going to want to make sure you clean this inside surface where the bearing seats. Either use like an unabrasive wire wheel on a drill, a die grinder or something. Clean that surface, lubricate it with a little bit of grease or oil, slide your bearing in, and then you're going to want to do the same thing inside the bearing, and you're going to put the hub in, clean that all up with a nice little bit of grease, and it should slide on. As you can see on this bearing, the raceland, this guy right here, is part of the bearing. That is the line right there, that black line to there is the raceland. Get a good look at that. That is stuck on there. If you're reusing this hub, you can use a cut-off wheel and cut this until it breaks free, and then you should be able to just knock it off. If you put a little nick into the hub, that's fine. It's not a big deal. It'll still seep back down into there. The tiny amount of weight and balance is meaningless. You're going to want to clean all this surface up with some sandpaper and then grease it before you slide it in. That will get your bearing and hub replaced, and then everything's just the reverse order to install. Thanks for watching. I'll make a little bit about the next part where I'm doing the upper ball joint on the upper control arm. Comment, subscribe, let me know what you guys want to see. Thanks for watching.